But God hath introduced man to be a spectator of himself and of his works, and not a spectator only, but also an interpreter of them. Pictetus. It is rumored that a large-scale Israeli attack on Iran will begin Friday. Will it come to pass? The mobilization announcements in North Korea, combined with other war preparations, suggest the possibility of a renewed Korean conflict. The Chinese fleet is positioned for a blockade around Taiwan. Here in the United States, we are on the eve of an election which could split the country. Are the communists in Beijing and Pyongyang planning an October surprise? Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, publicly says his country's counterattack on Iran will be deadly, precise, and above all, surprising. We have seen many signs of impending war. Russia's leaders have warned of a nuclear exchange. China's leaders have been warning their people to get ready. Somehow, America's leaders have been deaf to all of this. They have ignored the military buildup of China and Russia and North Korea. They have not improved our nuclear deterrent. They have not hardened our power grid. They have not built blast or fallout shelters for the population. They have neglected everything. If World War III starts tomorrow, it will not be the work of America or Israel, or of some shadowy capitalist cabal. The next war is the work of communists in Beijing and Moscow. Yet, communist-inspired disinformation has so contaminated our public discourse that we are set to blame our own country, our own military-industrial complex, and the Jews. The acceptance of blame by Americans is, unfortunately, part of a targeted demoralization process described by Lenin and outlined by KGB defector Yuri Bezmenov. Demoralizing Americans so that they blame their own institutions is an important communist op. The communists want to destroy America, but they must make everyone believe that America deserves destruction. They convinced the left long ago, and now they are trying to convince the right. The coming war has been prepared, over the course of 3 or 4 decades, by communist think tanks and committees in Beijing and Moscow. We know about these preparations from Russian and Chinese defectors. In terms of psychological warfare, the communists did the following. First, they took away the image of our enemy, then they tricked us into a partial disarmament, then they tricked us into building up China. And we fell for it all. In setting this up, they have relied on criminal cartels, secret agent networks, terrorists, corrupt politicians, greedy businessmen, and more. They have built their political and military strongholds through deceit. They have worked to transform the world through the abuse of language and the falsification of thought. Their ideology, which they deny exists, is merely a weapon which, like other weapons, has evolved through several iterations. And this weapon has succeeded brilliantly. The Greek Stoic philosopher, Epictetus, 50 to 135 AD, explained, "It is a shame for man to begin and to leave off where the brutes do. Yet here we are, victims of our own stupidity." Aristotle said that man was the rational animal, called upon to interpret the world, to articulate truth. Human society depends on that articulation. In this matter, we have lost the art of spectating and interpreting. Totalitarian slogans have a way of colonizing people's minds. After a steady diet of slogans, people cannot see the truth. They lose the ability to spectate. All they can do is regurgitate the latest lies. It was Socrates who first demonstrated the majority's preference for lies. He questioned the wise men of his day and found them empty. These hollow men made a good deal of money, he noted. They were popular. Yet Socrates said of them, they think they are something when they are nothing. Matthias Desmet, in a book titled The Psychology of Totalitarianism, wrote that the mechanist materialist view of man and the world creates the specific social psychological conditions in which mass formation and totalitarianism thrive. 3. By mass formation, he means mass formation psychosis. That is, a kind of political insanity. This is not the insanity of schizophrenia. It is the insanity of those who indulge in what George Orwell, in his dystopian novel 1984, called double plus good duck speaking. Here is the language of an intoxicating and addictive lie. As the addiction grows, the acolyte evolves. In the end, he becomes an accessory to mass murder. Mass murder is always the child of perverse ideas. For example, there is the idea that the sexes are alike and interchangeable, that rank order should be inverted, that the ignorant should hold sway over the wise, that the poor should eat the rich. Before mass murder, there will be a sign along the road. Welcome to topsy-turvydom. One might indeed use fear to control people under a dictatorship, but the totalitarian state goes the extra mile by depriving the individual of clear language and common sense. When that happens, people tend to become cynical about the truth. For nonsense accustoms the citizen to irrationality and arbitrariness. In time, people throw up their hands. Reason is useless, they say. Just follow the social engineers. Do whatever they say. Stop trying to make sense out of it. And then, once gibberish has put an end to meaningful communication, people will find themselves isolated from each other. The symbols now preferred in describing political reality are as empty as they are dishonest. Here is the favored nonsense of a rising activism which claims for itself scientific or religious political validity. Examples include the theory of global warming, critical race theory, belief in equality, faith in democracy, conspiracy theory. Here are alleged truths that never amount to anything. The resulting political articulations lead directly to suicidal policies like open borders or deficit spending. Our leaders, having adopted gibberish disguised as theory, tell us to follow the science. We were told, during the pandemic, that an experimental vaccine is safe and effective, even though there was no proper testing. And people lined up by the tens of millions to be guinea pigs. A prominent Chinese-American anti-communist recently whispered a question to me. Why are they all so stupid? Meanwhile, the bureaucrats are free to tack nonsense onto nonsense. Rather than wondering if millions have been poisoned by an untested injection, the CDC says the increase in cancers and heart attacks are due to climate change. It ought to take your breath away. By claiming there is a scientific consensus, after threatening those scientists who refuse to obey bureaucratic dictates, they remake science in their own image. That is, in the image of the bully. This is a process that necessarily blots out true men of science. For science belongs to the individual who discovers, not to the bureaucrat who idiotically administers. Science is the most intensive spectating of all, and involves a great deal of interpretation. It is, one might say, God's work. But now it is being taken over by the devil. According to Matthias Desmet, science can, in essence, be defined as open-mindedness. Today's so-called scientific discourse, however, is not open-minded. As Desmet says, to the extent that the scientific discourse of our time became an ideology, it lost its virtue of truth-telling. Nothing illustrates this better than the so-called replication crisis that erupted in academia in 2005. Here, we find scientific fraud on a massive scale, enabled by bureaucracy. Here we have fraud by the bucketful. Here we find scientists making discoveries by the misuse of scanning technology, by the counterfeiting of archaeological artifacts, by the forging of embryo clones, by mixing human and monkey bones to say they have found the missing link. Desmet points to the work of Daniele Finelli, who conducted a systematic survey in 2009 and found that at least 72% of researchers were willing to somehow distort their research results. Science becomes a criminal enterprise under this kind of stewardship. It leads to beliefs about reality that are entirely false. No commonwealth can survive this kind of stewardship for long. If we are on the brink of world war, think of who our leaders are. Objectively, these are people who have promoted false political narratives. They have promoted mass formation psychosis. I submit that any politician who promotes mass psychosis is a public enemy. Such, indeed, is Vice President Kamala Harris, whose cynical lies and evasions during her interview with Bret Baier fit perfectly with her well-established plagiarisms and fraudulent career claims. Shall we say, in this context, I lost my country because a lying politician outsmarted me? Is there no shame in being tricked by someone so stupid, venal, and nuts? Of course, it is shameful. Whatever happens in the next 24 hours, in the next 2 weeks, be a spectator and an interpreter. Think for yourself. Keep your eyes wide open.